This is Mike Jones, and I'm coming to you with a series of short videos, I hope short, of where I want to do somewhat of a post-mortem of the Pacific Rim Headache Center. Talk a little bit about things that went right and things that went wrong. And what I have in mind especially are PAs who are interested in owning their own practice. And some of these things I say will apply. I think a lot of them will apply, and some certainly are different. And I have to tell you, I'm coming from you in the harbor in Malta, one of the harbors. I'm staying in a little apartment. I have to show you around a little bit. I was going to film inside my apartment, but it's just such a glorious day, especially in January. I think about Washington State, gloomy and rainy, and just the sun is shining. It feels like it's in the 70s here. But I'm staying in an apartment just over my head in that stone structure. But I'm going to give you a panoramic view, and then I'll finish my talk today. But I have to give you a background of where I'm coming from. And I wanted to be outside, but there certainly are a lot of distractions. This is a Saturday afternoon, and lots of church bells all day. And Malta as a country is the most densely populated country in Europe, so there's bound to be a lot of distractions. And I'll probably finish this series inside my apartment where it's quieter. But this part, I'll probably do 3 or 4 little video snippets, but this part I want to talk about the beginnings of Pacific Rim Headache Center, how it got started, my motivations and my planning and some of those things. A little bit about myself, just purely by accident. When I came out of PA school in 1982, it was really difficult to find a job, especially in Kentucky. But I won't go through the detailed stories, but somewhat by accident, I ended up working for who's considered, even today, the top headache specialist in the world, Joel Saper, in Ann Arbor, Michigan. So he got me on the path of headache as a subspecialty, and I developed a real passion for those people who are neglected by so much of medical society, including neurologists. So to make a long story short, I ended up at Mayo Clinic working their headache division for a number of years, and I came out to the Pacific Northwest, where I tried very hard to find a job with a neurology group where I could create a headache clinic, and none of them were interested. Matter of fact, none of them were interested in having a PA, period, except for one was a little bit open, and I came out and on my own money and met with him a couple of times, and finally convinced them. Actually, I signed a contract hardly without them knowing it, because I never could get them to sign one. And came on out, moved out, and started working at the neurology group and created a headache clinic within that group. But as a headache specialist, neurology clinics often neglect the headache patient. And I always had this longing in the back of my mind. Maybe it's an entrepreneurial thinking that I could do things a lot better. And, you know, there's different motivations, and all of them have honor. My motivation wasn't trying to make a lot of money. I just knew that I could provide headache medicine care much better than anything around me, except for maybe one spot in Seattle, which was 80 miles south. So to make another long story short, there was one other headache specialist in my whole region, Jim Morin, Dr. Jim Morin, who was he took an interesting route. That he was a family practice physician who got interested in headache disorders and eventually developed a headache clinic. So he and I were the only two, you might say we were competitors, but we were friends, the only two headache specialists in our region. So one day, one of his patients came into my office and told me that he had retired. Now Jim is about 63 or 64, and I was a little surprised by that. And they told me he was working at the VA, which was in the same town I was working in. Dr. Morin was working in Bellingham previously, and the VA was just down the street from me in Mount Vernon. So immediately, as soon as I had a break, I walked down the street up to his clinic, and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, he's got fed up with the business side of headache, or business side of medicine in general, and he was quitting, and he wanted to go to work for the VA where he could clock in and clock out each day." Well, that got me thinking. I asked him, I said, "Could we go out to dinner?" And he said, "Sure." So I went out to dinner, and I said, "What would you think about us creating a headache-specific clinic? You and I. You be my supervising physician, and I'll see most of the patients, if not all of them." And he said, "I would love to do that." But he said, from his experience, he said he would never, ever, ever be involved in medical business side again. So it wasn't that I wanted to be a PA owner. It was sort of an opportunity of necessity where I felt like we really need to have this clinic, that I felt like I had ideas that we could make a much better clinic, and he was willing to be part of that. So at that juncture, and this was a little over 5 years ago, probably 5.5 years ago, that I started out trying to develop a plan to create a headache clinic. Now I'm gonna end this now in just a second, but I want to say my first few steps, and this is where I think some of you are at now, is that I read several books on just on business. I started doing research on all the laws regarding PA ownership. I started looking at financing. Now I'll say one more thing just before I close. I know there's a lot of PAs who have always done pretty well financially, but I'm not one of those. And for several reasons. One reason, I have 5 children. All 5 went through college, and 3 are working on doctorate degrees now. So that was a pretty big expense. Also, making a lot of money was never my personal priority. So I never looked for jobs that paid well. Matter of fact, I spent a significant amount of my time overseas working for $300 or $400 a month. So that was never important to me. So when I came to the point of opening this practice, I first did my business estimate, and based on my kind of practice, I felt like I needed about $120,000 to start. And that's probably pretty accurate looking back. And again, I had a small practice. Now in our situation when we started, I was seeing patients 5 days a week, and Dr. Morin would see patients 3 days a month. So that's the size of the practice that we had. And I had one other full-time employee, a medical assistant, and also I'm still talking about my pre-opening plans, and I wanted to hire a part-time biller estimated about 20 hours a week. So based on that model, with a full-time office in the island where I live, Anacortes, and a 1 day a week rental space in the city of Bellingham. So based on that, I figured I needed about $120,000, and I think that's right. Now I'll explain as I get into the next segment of this, when I started actually implementing my plan of how I ended up with $100,000. So I was a little bit short on money in the beginning. But I think that's a fair estimate. Now, if you are interested, I know I've talked to PAs who are across the whole spectrum of being larger than what I'm talking about or being much smaller. And actually, I would recommend, and I'm getting ahead of myself, that if you were going to start a practice, that you would be either larger than I was or you'd be smaller. And I'll talk about at the very end. But if you're smaller, you would need less money. And of course, if you're larger, if you're going to have like 2 full-time physicians working in your group, a nurse, things like that, you're going to need a lot more than $120,000 to get your doors open. The biggest reason for that, and a PA mentor of mine that who does have a larger practice, I think he has 3 physicians working for him, he told me the best advice he could give me is do your business plan, and you have to do a business plan before you start. And then when you're done, take your expenses and double them, and take your income and cut it in half. And I think he was pretty accurate on that. And I'll get into why that works out that way. So next time I see you, probably be inside my apartment where there's less distractions.